Good afternoon. My name is Ala McCoy. I'm Director of Startup Support at the University of Maryland Evan Ventures. And I would like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone who joined us today at the next installment of our Startup Fundamentals Workshop Series. This series is offered by Evan Ventures, as well as in collaboration with the England Center for Entrepreneurship at the Smith School of Business and Maryland Technology Enterprise Institute at the Clark School of Engineering. To those of you who are attending our live session, please submit your questions via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Our presenter will stop about halfway through the presentation and will address all of the questions that will have accumulated in the Q&A. So please, as soon as a question pops up, put it in the Q&A function. And if you see that somebody else asked a great question, you can upvote it as well. Since we are recording this presentation, it will be posted on our YouTube channel. You have an option to submit your question anonymously if you wish to do so. Also, at the end of the presentation, when we get back to the other half of the questions, I will be able to, you can raise your digital hand, there's a button for that, and I can unmute your mic and you can ask your question live. But please keep those questions coming. And so today we will hear from serial entrepreneur and early stage investor. Also, as you can see, he is a Maryland alum, dedicated one. So Evan Shubin. He will discuss the core principles of entrepreneurship and will provide very valuable insights from his own startup journey, including his latest venture, Game Gym, which is a company in the booming esports market. So Evan, thank you so much today for spending your time with us and sharing your insights. We're looking forward to learning from you. The mic is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for participating today. And I hope that by telling my story, I can give you some insight into the world of startups and early stage investing. Thanks very much to Ala for inviting me. And thanks to everyone at the University of Maryland Dingman Center for Entrepreneurship. I started out as a full-time employee in the trade show industry, including 4 years at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, from 1997 to 2001. I served as director of marketing and then vice president of sales and marketing. I left CES in 2001 to launch my own consulting firm. And around that same time, John McDonald, a major player in the industry, had just retired from a long career as CEO of Casio, and he was also starting his own consulting firm. The difference was that John was already rich. And so the model he shared with me for his firm was that he was going to choose a group of startups in the consumer electronics industry. And instead of getting paid cash, he would get paid in equity for his time. I couldn't afford to follow that model exactly, but I took his advice to heart. And whenever I could, I took equity as partial payment for my consulting gigs. Then in 2008, my wife and I launched Exhibitor Invites, which I'll talk about in just a minute. All told, I've been the founder or co-founder of 6 different startups, and I've been directly involved in 22 different early stage companies as a founder, investor, senior executive, or some combination of all 3. As a founder or investor, I'm proud to say I've had 3 successful exits so far. I'm currently serving as COO for 3 different startups, Game Gym, Leadseed, and Half a Hire, and serving as president of Candlelight Partners, our very small family office. And I'll talk about all of those in a minute. So here's my first nugget of wisdom. The best way to launch a company is to bootstrap it. Everybody talks about fundraising and how startups can go with VCs and make a lot of money and exit. But the reality is that fundraising is a nightmare. If you can build a product or service company from the ground up and start generating revenue and profits without taking any outside investment, that is how you should do it. You might not reach unicorn status and exit as a billionaire, but guess what? Almost nobody does that anyway. With Exhibitor Invites, I was facing a shark bite problem. I was serving as part-time director of marketing for Supercom, one of the largest trade shows in the country, and for a variety of reasons, the show was really struggling. Due to some major branding issues, we were having an incredibly hard time getting people to register for the show, and that was my primary job. I had tried a program at CES to get exhibitors to invite their customers to the show, which seemed like a no-brainer, but exhibitors had refused to spend a single dime to partner with us on pre-show marketing. so I knew that exhibitors wouldn't pay for it. This was 2008, and email was just starting to take off. Exhibitors had pretty strong customer databases with a lot of email addresses, but email marketing was not as easy or prevalent as it is today. My wife, Michelle, is an expert in web design, HTML coding, and email marketing, and so I asked her to build a system that would allow exhibitors to quickly and easily send email invitations about the show to their customers and prospects. We did a beta test of the product at SuperCom in June 2008, and then again at Graph Expo in October. We got great results, really compelling case studies on how the program generated a ton of attendees, and even more exciting, they were brand new attendees who had never participated in the show before. Since I was a prototypical customer, director of marketing at a big trade show, I knew the pain points, I spoke their language, and I had the data required to convince other shows to give exhibitor invites a try. I told my wife that I thought we were onto something, and maybe we have 6 or 7 shows use the product in 2009. We blew those numbers out of the water. I started calling everyone I knew in the industry. I got 3 big name shows to pay for the product in spring of 2009, and again, we delivered great results. We finished the year with 18 paying customers, and in 2010, that exploded to 52 customers with an ASP, average sales price, of 15 grand per show. In 2011, we reached 1 million in revenue and a very healthy profit margin, just 36 months after launch and 24 months after taking our first paying customer. We ran the company for another 8 years and then merged it with a competitor. Was it a $100 million exit? Far from it. But we had built a very profitable small business, and along with 2 other small exits along the way, it gave us the freedom and flexibility to do whatever we wanted from that point forward. You don't need a unicorn exit. You don't need to launch a company like Facebook or Uber in order to be successful in the startup world. In many cases, you can achieve all your goals simply by turning your startup into a profitable small business and running it successfully for 10 years or so. We had a great run with exhibitor invites, and it set the stage for everything since. But it's also our biggest success story so far. The very next company we launched failed, and it was a heartbreaker. And there have been plenty of failures and near misses along the way. And that's what nobody really talks about. People track startup success and exits in different ways, and they often use different starting points. But based on all the data I've seen, I would say that optimistically, 1 in 20 startups reach a successful exit, defined as a significant financial windfall for the founders and shareholders. 1 in 20. The only good news about that is you definitely learn more from your failures than your successes. And so here's some insight from my biggest failures so far in roughly chronological order. So first up, CD Now. In 2002, after CES, but before we launched exhibitor invites, I was approached by a college buddy who had launched CD Now, a mail order company for music CDs. He asked me to join him as employee number 3. I told him that I didn't think people were going to pay a premium to buy CDs online, rather than going in person to a record store. Boy, was I wrong about that. A few short years later, he sold CD Now to Bertelsmann for $80 million. BD Metrics. This one wasn't my fault, but I had a seat in the second row to watch the collapse. I had followed the John McDonald model and taken shares as partial payment for my role there as a regional sales director. Everything was going well. BD Metrics had created a great new technology for attendees to research and plan their time at trade shows, who they were going to visit, what conference sessions they were going to go to, and we were the industry's darling. The problem, we couldn't monetize it. The sales pitch to trade show organizers was simple. Sign a 3-year contract for 35 grand a year, and at the end of year 3, we will have figured out how to generate enough revenue from your community so that your annual share of that revenue would be more than the 35K. You would be making money rather than paying us for the program. More than 100 shows had signed these 3-year deals. And we had a plan, and it was starting to work. But as those 3-year agreements were coming to an end, only the 2 biggest shows in the country, CES and PAC Expo, were close to 35 grand in revenue share. And here's the real tragedy. Around that same time, we had an acquisition offer from Freeman, the biggest service provider in the trade show industry. Freeman had taken a 5% stake in BD Metrics previously, and now they wanted to buy the whole company for $80 million. The VCs on the BD Metrics board countered with $100 million, and the deal fell apart. Shortly after that, all those 3-year contracts started to expire, and again, except for the 2 biggest shows in the country, we had failed to generate enough revenue to cover the $35,000 annual fee. Nobody else renewed their contracts, and a short time later, the company shut down. I still have the paperwork with my worthless BD Metrics shares. I owned about 1% of the company, so if that deal had gone through at $80 million, I would have seen a payout of around $800,000. I understand why the VCs countered the offer, but I don't understand why they let the deal fall apart. I wasn't directly involved in those discussions, although I heard bits and pieces after the fact. I can only assume that they didn't see the writing on the wall regarding the expiring 3-year contracts, or the CEO didn't tell them. So something to keep in mind, VCs and angels often have very different goals and objectives from founders and other shareholders. Atlas we'll talk about in a minute. Global IntelliSystems, another tough lesson with this one. Global was our technology partner for exhibitor invites, and the founder, John Brogan, had built a successful email delivery business with several huge customers. Exhibitor invites, with around 50 million outbound emails a year, was actually one of his smaller customers. Unfortunately, he had fallen on tough times, with 3 of the largest customers cutting back significantly, all at the same time. John approached me and my wife for a cash infusion and asked for our help in running the company. I reviewed all the financials, we came to terms on the deal, and we wrote him a check and joined the company, with me as COO and head of sales, and Michelle as VP of operations. Michelle and I committed to spending half of our time each working for Global and to get paid completely in equity. The plan, bring in new customers, cut costs, get back to profitability, and live happily ever after. What John didn't tell us was that when those 3 big customers started cutting back, he was in the middle of a costly systems upgrade, new servers, new locations, and none of those expenses had hit the books yet. He had taken out more than $600,000 in short-term, high-interest loans to replace the lost revenue and pay for the upgrades. To add insult to injury, his idiot accountant, and I'm sorry, there's no other way to say it, his idiot accountant logged those short-term loans as revenue. So when I looked at the books, revenue was $600K too high and assets were $600K too low. The company was deeper in the red than I thought, the landscape was changing, and there was no way to dig out. We hung in for a year trying to bring new customers and right the ship, but it was hopeless. Michelle and I left, and Global IntelliSystems went into bankruptcy. Always follow the money, and never assume that founders or their team members are experts in every aspect of their business. What I should have done is dig deeper into the P&L, rather than just review the top-line revenue and expenses and take John's word for it. I should have dug into it line by line. If you had $1 million in revenue last year, tell me exactly which customers it came from, and what is the projected revenue and projected expenses for next year. The glamorous world of startups has many, many pitfalls you need to avoid. Atlas was a real heartbreaker. Fresh on the heels of our success with exhibitor invites, as we were adding customers left and right, we had the opportunity to buy a software solution dirt cheap from a startup that had run out of money. The software was set up at kiosks throughout a trade show, allowing attendees to search for exhibitors or educational sessions, and then it would show you from where you were how to get to that exhibitor's booth or that session. The exhibitors paid for enhanced visibility, sponsored keywords, etc. So I got a group together, we launched Atlas and bought the software, and we brought it back to market. I thought it would be easy. For one thing, it was the same exact customers, trade show organizers, and here was another great solution for the industry. But where exhibitor invites was basically software as a service, with some additional human hours per show, Atlas was far more labor and capital intensive. You needed several kiosks around the trade show where people could access the software, and that cost time and money to implement and support. The ASP for exhibitor invites was around 15 grand per show. The ASP for Atlas was more like 35 grand per show. Also, as opposed to exhibitor invites, the value proposition wasn't quite as clear-cut. With exhibitor invites, it was pay us money and we'll bring you more attendees. Plus, we were able to prove that exhibitors who used the product got more booth traffic. Everybody wins, and that made it a pretty easy sell. But similar to BD Metrics, and maybe I should have known better, the value prop for Atlas was pay us money. Your attendees will have a much better experience, and over time, your exhibitors will spend enough marketing dollars on advertising to cover your costs and then some. It was just not compelling enough. And instead of pitching the marketing director, who was always hungry for more attendees and had a dedicated budget for programs like exhibitor invites, in this case, I was pitching the show director one level up, and again, without as clear of a value proposition. Finally, around that time, several companies started developing mobile apps that had the same search and wayfinding functionality. It was definitely more difficult for attendees to plan their walking path around a big trade show on their phone, but it was a good enough solution, and the cost was around 5 grand per show rather than 35 grand. We did secure one long-term customer who had a starter advertising package in place, that covered the cost of the program. But over the next 4 years, no matter how hard I tried, we could never get over the hump and bring in more customers. All the partners got back their cash investment, but nobody got compensated for the significant amount of time that we had all devoted to the project. The lesson, which you've probably figured out already, I thought that the Atlas product was similar enough to exhibitor invites that it would be easy to replicate our success there. But key differences, including price point, customer pain, and a much cheaper, good enough competitive solution, made it untenable. So before we get into the next chapter, let's take a short break for questions.
Thank you. Very interesting insights and very interesting considerations. I don't see any questions submitted. If anybody would like to raise your hand at this point, I can also unmute your mic, or you can very quickly type it in. Let's see. I don't see any questions. Why don't we go ahead with the presentation and see if people get more questions further.
No problem. And we'll definitely have time at the end for more questions.
Actually, we do have one question.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. How do you get over the fear of failure? How do you move past the bad feelings to learn from them?
Yeah, so now it's happened enough, right? I mean, you didn't even hear about all of them. You heard about the 4 big ones that I thought were important enough to share, in the lessons. That it's happened enough that there's not as much fear anymore. There's definitely still sadness. I'm very disappointed when a startup fails that I'm involved in, either when I write a check or when I get more heavily involved or when I found the company, for sure. But you've just got to keep doing it. It's a numbers game. I've been lucky. I've beaten the odds so far. But again, 1 in 20. That's a 5% success rate. And so if you want to be in this business, if you want to launch companies, if you think that you've got some good ideas that are worth, going after, you've got to be prepared to fail. You've got to, and be ready to start again afterwards, because it's likely that you're not going to succeed every time. You may not succeed the first or second time, but sooner or later, if you keep doing it, you will succeed in one way or another.
Thank you. We have one more question. With your experience and what you know now, what would you tell your younger self when you were starting your first company?
That's a great question. So one thing, I talk about this a little bit later, one thing I would tell my younger self is to start getting involved in startups earlier, because the sooner you start, the sooner you get that first success or failure, and then you keep going. Because what you really have the least of is time. I mean, certainly money as well, but you can only be involved in so many startups. But in terms of that first startup, I would say that one thing I took it whenever there was a failure, after a couple of years, we're up to 50 plus customers, and little things always went wrong. And from time to time, big things went wrong. And I always took it personally. And it was, you would get very upset. I got very upset. And I would say that you have to be able to not take it personally, even if it's your baby. This Exhibitor Invites was my idea through and through, and my wife built it, and I'm very proud of what we accomplished. But there were plenty of ups and downs, and 2 really intense rounds of competition, different companies coming at us. You've got to just stick with it and try to stay unemotional if possible.
Thank you. Really great advice.
Okay, so there'll definitely be time at the end for more questions. I'm going to go ahead and keep going now. So now it's late 2019. Atlas is gone, and we've merged Exhibitor Invites with a competitor. I'm helping with the transition, but that's also winding down, and I'm looking for my next challenge. It's time to go full on John McDonald. I launched Candlelight Partners with the support of my mother and my sister, and of course my wife, Michelle. It's a very small family office, and what that means is it's similar to any other early stage investment firm, except it's driven and funded by the Shubin family, and we actively trade both cash and hours for equity. I believe that the lessons I've learned launching and running startups and small companies allow me to make better investment decisions when it comes to startups, and also to add value to the startups that we invest in. So the first step was to find 2 to 3 startups where Michelle and I could serve as senior executives in addition to investing cash. And then once our time was maxed out, seek other investment opportunities where the founder and their team were accomplished enough that they didn't need our help on a daily basis. And so far, so good. We have 6 companies in our portfolio, and I serve as COO for 3 of them, and Michelle serves as VP of Operations for 1. What I look for when choosing startups. First off, a shout out to Dan Simpkins. He's a superstar Forex founder and angel investor over in Bethesda. His current company is called Dwellwell. And he shared this shopping list with me when I launched Candlelight Partners. The first thing that you must look for is a great founder who has surrounded themselves with a great team. I posted an article about this on LinkedIn recently. Startup founders, and especially first-time founders, face enormous challenges. And so as an investor, either of your time or your money or both, it is absolutely critical that the founder is not just a dreamer with great vision, but has good business sense as well. Or they have someone on the team who can run the business while they do the dreaming. The next 2 bullets are equally important. Market size. If you've got an incredible product that is literally going to change the world for 10 people, well, you're not going to get very far with that. Competitive advantage. What are you doing differently? How are you disrupting the current business model? Or have you identified a unique group of customers and a mission critical problem that they have and that you can solve for them? And that segues into the next point. I don't think that every startup needs to cure cancer or end world hunger, but what they should all do is make each of their customers' lives a little bit better or a lot better. I'm not interested in companies that make money just to make money. Finally, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Given my time as COO of Game Jam, I think I have a strong understanding of the huge potential for all sorts of different companies in the esports space, and I get approached all the time. But as long as Game Jam is chugging along, I'm not going to invest or get heavily involved with another esports startup. Diversification is key. Each new investment must be totally different from the others in our current portfolio. Another great way to get involved with a company is to start as happy customers. Michelle and I have 2 sons who are avid video game players. We met founder Josh Hafkin at an open house, and we got to know him and understand his vision for Game Jam as a provider of much needed structure and support for gamers of all ages. When Josh sent an email to the Game Jam community looking for funding as well as people to help grow the company, we came on board with me as COO and Michelle as VP of Operations. It's been a strong partnership because we share the same vision and we have complementary skill sets. Game Jam owns and operates a college league here in the Mid-Atlantic region, We offer esports programs at all 3 levels of Montgomery County Public Schools, including teacher training and a competitive high school league. We recently launched our mobile app, which provides curated workouts for gamers of all ages to improve their video game skills in a more healthy and efficient way. Michelle and I were the very first outside investors, and we've been members of the senior team for more than 3.5 years, trading our hours for equity. 2 years ago, Game Jam opened its first investment round, and we raised $700,000 at a $5 million valuation. I'm proud to say that things are going well, and we just opened our second investment round at a $10 million valuation. But as opposed to exhibitor invites, which was revenue and profit positive from the very start, Game Jam has generated some revenue each year since 2019, but not enough to cover our monthly expenses. Although this is a much more common model for startups, you live from round to round until you get to break even and stand the company up, it obviously has its drawbacks. Fundraising, as I mentioned earlier, is a nightmare. It takes a lot of time, pitching, follow-up meetings, chasing investors who are super excited 1 minute and then ghost you the next. And then, if something doesn't go according to plan, production or development delays, cost overruns, a pandemic, for example, you can run out of money and the lights go out. Nobody brags about the startup they founded that lasted for 6 years, raised $50 million in VC funding, and then failed because they couldn't get to break even. But guess what? 19 out of 20 are probably very similar stories to that. I don't love everything about social media. I could do without the bots, the people pretending to want your advice and then turning around and trying to sell you something, and the attempts by the platforms to force engagement. But 2 of my most valuable business relationships have started there. Leadseed founder Ed Zumstein approached me on LinkedIn, and we danced for 5 months, getting to know each other through Zoom and phone calls. And then I joined Leadseed as COO in September 2021 at a great time. Over the past 3 years, Ed had gotten the company to break even on $1 million in ARR. ARR stands for annual recurring revenue. What Leadseed does is we take raw leads, for example, homeowners interested in solar panels for their house, and we use a variety of scripts, integrations with off-the-shelf software, and human interaction to qualify the good leads and disqualify the bad ones, thus saving our customers significant time and money. Just like exhibitor invites, Ed had been a customer with a shark bite problem. He was VP of sales for a large solar panel installer in California, and 40% of the leads he purchased were unqualified for one reason or another. He got tired of weeding through all those bad leads, so he built Leadseed to solve that problem. Like Game Jam, I've invested cash and my time in exchange for equity. Over the past 2 years, we've nearly doubled revenue. We've expanded into several other markets beyond solar, and the company is generating a nice little profit. I'll take credit for some of that, but really, Ed put in the hard work to get to break even. It gets much easier after that. Leadseed was valued by Equidem at $12.9 million in late 2022, an increase of $4 million from Equidem's original valuation in 2020. We don't need outside money. There is no pressure to grow at a specific rate or sell in 3 years for $100 million. All we need to do is keep our customers happy, add new customers and markets where it makes sense, and bank the profits. We might sell at some point or take outside investment if we think that more cash on hand will accelerate growth, but it will be on our terms and our schedule. I'm very thankful, especially this time of year, that Ed Zumstein found me back in April 2020, because it's been a great partnership. In April of this year, we launched Half the Hire together to address a shark bite problem for all small businesses, including startups, and that is the need for affordable support staff. Once again, Ed and I were prototypical customers. As serial entrepreneurs over the years, we're always looking for part-time and full-time high-quality help, but the comparative cost for US staffers, especially entry-level workers, is very high. What Half the Hire does is source offshore workers from such countries as the Philippines and Costa Rica with high levels of education and computer literacy, but much lower costs of living. Everybody wins. The offshore workers are happy for the gigs, and our US customers get great staffers at a much lower cost. 6 months in, we have 5 happy repeat customers and 100 grand in AR. What I love about Half a Hire is the zero burn model. What that means is that the 5 initial partners, me and Ed as the co-founders, plus 3 other handpicked staffers, we are all working part-time on Half a Hire. We're all shareholders, and we're all getting paid purely on the company's profits. Monthly cash expenses are almost zero. And with 5 paying customers, we're already turning a small profit, and there's nowhere to go but up. Exhibitor Invites was launched in the exact same way. The only challenge with this model is finding that initial team of entrepreneurs who are financially secure enough to take on a side hustle like this, knowing the risks and the rewards. Over time, we'll need to hire additional staff and pay them salaries and benefits, but we'll do that carefully as revenue increases. And wherever possible, we'll use offshore. So I've shared some lessons along the way, but this is the big one. Startups are romanticized because nobody brags about their failures. Pretty much all you ever hear about or read about are the huge successes. But those are few and far between, which leads me to the Facebook fallacy. It's easy to launch a company. It won't take that much of my time. Investors will be banging down my door. It won't take that long to reach critical mass, and then we'll go public and I'll be rich. It just doesn't happen that way very often. It takes a lot of time and effort, usually 8 to 10 years to see an exit. And if you're lucky, you're making a reasonable wage during that time. Securing outside investment is a nightmare, and the best case scenario is a 5% success rate, 1 in 20. Don't get me wrong, I love working on startups, and I hope to do so for the rest of my life. There's one thing I would have done differently, would have been to get involved earlier in my career. And I'm not trying to scare you off. I just want you to know what you're in for. I hope you all dive in at some point. And there are several different ways to do that. And I'll give you some ideas and a checklist for each of the options. So option 1, and it might sound counterintuitive, but join a healthy company. When founders pitch, they often talk about how the team cut their teeth at Google or Facebook or Apple or healthy companies in the same industry as the startup, because they went there, they learned what they needed to learn, and then they started their own business. Option 2, instead of launching your own startup, first join an existing startup. There's still going to be stress and risk, but not as much. Hopefully you'll get paid a fair salary, earn some equity or options, and learn what you need to learn, and start building your reputation and your network. So let's talk about equity and stock options for a minute. When a company gives you equity, that means you have actual shares in the company right then and there. When a company gives you options, that means you have the right to buy the shares at a later date at a specific price, often referred to as your strike price. You only benefit if the share price is higher when you're able to execute the options than your strike price. Both of these are popular with early stage startups, especially options. Just keep in mind that equity and options should always be gravy or the cherry on the cake. You should be able to live on your salary, not just survive. You should be able to fund your 401k, put a little money away, and you should have reasonable benefits. You should never pay for the right to work for a startup. And what I mean by that is, don't sacrifice opportunity in terms of salary or benefits just to work there and get options or equity. Option 3, get a side hustle. This is the Half a Hire model. All 3 of our partners have full-time jobs or other sources of income. They're each spending 20 hours a week on Half a Hire. And in exchange, we've given them equity in the company and a share of the profits. Again, less risk, and you can learn and build your reputation along the way. You can also launch your own startup this way as a side hustle, keeping your full-time job until the startup takes off and demands all of your time. You're still thinking about launching your very own startup, good for you. You're going to need fire and persistence to make it work, but there's nothing more rewarding than creating something out of nothing. The money, yes, but also happy customers, happy team members, and a new product or service that really does have an impact. So when you launch a company, you need to figure out how to make money, how to get to break even, and then get to profitability. That means you need to figure out how to get paying customers. And the best way to do that is through customer discovery. Get on the phone with your potential customers, ask them questions, and listen to the answers. Just because you think that you have a great solution to a shark bite problem doesn't mean that you're right. Looking back, I definitely did not do enough customer discovery before launching Atlas, and I had it right at my fingertips. They were Exhibitor Invites customers. I didn't call enough of them and ask them about Atlas and what they'd be interested in. Be willing and be prepared to pivot based on what potential customers are telling you. And don't form a startup with your friends or your significant other. I know that I did not follow this advice at all. Michelle and I have launched 4 companies together and worked on 2 others, but I would not recommend that to anyone. And don't try to save the world. Dial it back a bit and focus on generating revenue and standing the company up. If you want to do charity work, great. If you're on a mission, great. But launching a startup is hard enough if you're not making money. Do a charity side hustle instead. So again, all sorts of ways to break in. And next, I'll give you some checklists to follow as you're exploring your options. These lists build on each other. What I mean by that, pretty much all of the things I'm telling you to do as you research a healthy company applies if you research an existing startup that you're considering working for as well. Get a sense of how large and how healthy the company really is. How many employees? How long has the company been around? Is the company truly profitable? A lot of this information is public. If the company is publicly traded, find out if they've been paying regular dividends and track the stock price over the past 3 years. Always, always, always research the CEO and the leadership team. How long has each of them been with the company? What did they do previously? Stalk them on LinkedIn, do Google searches, really dig in. And finally, always ask yourself, who do I know? Who can I call? The ideal reference when you're researching a company is someone who just left a job there. Someone who works for a company someone who works for a competitor can be useful as well. So you can already see we've got some of the same bullets here, so I won't repeat them. But follow the money, not just the current PL, but also find out whatever you can about each of the investment rounds. Who is invested and how much? How much money has the company gone through so far? What is the monthly burn rate? And how long of a runway does the company have before the lights go out? Look into similar companies in the same space, as well as competitors, especially ones that have failed. What do they have in common? What stands out to you? What is this startup that you're considering working for doing differently? This one is pretty straightforward. The side hustle is really just a part-time job. But ideally, if it's a side hustle for a startup, you're getting equity or options plus valuable experience. Before you launch your own company, always ask yourself, what is my big idea? Ideally, like me with Exhibitor Invites or Ed with Leadseed, you're a customer with a shark bite problem, and none of the current solutions are good enough. Conduct customer discovery to make sure you're on the right track, and be prepared to pivot and adjust. And then, whatever the product or service, build an MVP to prove the concept. MVP stands for minimally viable product. Many founders have a great idea and evidence of customer interest, and they set out to build the most complete version of the product possible with all the bells and whistles. In my opinion, this is absolutely the wrong approach. That first version and every version after that should only include the most mission-critical features in order to confirm that customers are interested and are willing to pay cash money for your product. Next, what are your goals? Is it always going to be a hobby or a side hustle? Do you want this company to be your primary source of income for the next 10 years? Or do you want a decent exit so you can devote the rest of your life to charity work or traveling the world? All of these are perfectly legitimate goals, but you need to be honest with yourself about what you want, because that will play a huge role in how you move forward with your startup. Finally, where is the early financial support coming from? You've heard me say that bootstrapping is the best option, and to stay away from outside investors whenever possible and for as long as possible. One good solution in early days is a friends and family round. It can be a tough conversation, and I know that not everyone has a rich uncle, but friends and family are more willing to write you a check in the very early stages without quibbling about your exit strategy or timeline or valuation. In other words, they're more willing to take that leap of faith with you. Finally, there are a whole slew of accelerators and incubators out there designed to help educate founders, help them grow their startups, and position them for fundraising. Just be careful. There are definitely some bad actors in the bunch who take advantage of founders without delivering much real value. When you're talking to an accelerator or an incubator, and it feels like a high-pressure sale or sleazy like a used car dealership, trust your instincts. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. And again, always ask yourself, who do I know? Who can I call? And finally, no matter what your path is, grow and protect your public profile. Your reputation is one of your most valuable assets. Grow and protect your network. Spend time every week making new connections and nurturing your existing relationships. Never burn a bridge. And finally, create a list of target companies, whether it's competitors or kindred spirits, companies in the same space, or companies you might want to work for someday or merge with, and keep close tabs on them. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope I've given everyone some valuable takeaways. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me if I can help, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Evan. You have a very amazing story, and I'm glad that you shared not just the successes, but also the failures and what you learned from them, because like you said, lots of successes are talked about, but not a lot of failures are discussed. So thank you for that. We do have several questions in the queue waiting. Hope you're ready.
Yep.
So the first one is to bootstrap a startup, how many people would you hire for the company?
So it really depends on what you're building. With exhibitor invites, it was a web interface that allowed exhibitors to create their email campaign, and then a bridge to the back end, the email distribution system that Global IntelliSystems had. And so really all we needed to build it was Michelle, who built the front end and understood what the back end had to execute, and Global IntelliSystems and the folks there that allowed us to build that bridge and push those emails out, to and to be delivered. And then I did all of the sales and marketing. So it was really the three of us. But the way to think about it is in functional business areas: sales, marketing, operations, or development, product development. Those are really the three biggest areas. And then again, depending on the product, if it's an app, then obviously you need more developers. But the key when bootstrapping, is finding people that are willing to make that commitment, whether it's 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week, 5 hours a week, or 40 hours a week. They can make that commitment to work on the startup with essentially no guaranteed pay. That's what the bootstrapping means. Or if you have some money set aside to launch a company, okay, then you've got that budget to pay people or pay for development or whatever. So I would think about the functional areas: sales, marketing, operations. Those are the big ones. How many people do you need? Who can serve in those roles?
Thank you. Next question is, how do you suggest managing your time? Were there any tips that helped you manage everything effectively? Yeah, so a lot of people ask this. It's a great question. And, the way that I try to describe it is, even if you have a full-time job, you've always got multiple
projects going on. You've always got tasks and big projects and little projects. And, it's very rare that you literally got one thing you're doing all day in a full-time job. And so for me, it's really just about having those tasks for different companies. And you do want to break your time into, a standard 40-hour week. You're welcome to work 50 or more, or 30 if you want to work 30. But I generally try to break my time into 40. And, at this point, Game Gym gets about 20, Leadseed gets about 10, Half a Hire gets about 10. And it goes up and down, but you want to make sure that you don't bite off more than you can chew. And I'm definitely not taking on anything else at this point. I volunteer for Maryland, and I'm happy to do that. And I work with Rocket Pitch and the folks for Connectpreneur. I give them some time, but that's pretty much it. I am tapped out. The best way to really budget your time is to sort of push yourself up to that limit, right? Where you're at that, okay, I'm working too much, or I'm working exactly the right amount, or, I've got some time, I'm goofing off on Friday afternoons, or I'm not, maybe I'm not doing any work on the weekends. Well, that might be your choice, and that's a great choice to have. But if you wish, that you did have enough work to maybe put in an hour or two on Saturday mornings, then you sort of know what that capacity is. So I think the short answer is test it out, right? Figure out, okay, what do I have to budget for this project? And think of each startup or each job or each side hustle, as a project with it. And then, okay, I've got 40 hours. That's it. I don't want to do anymore. And try that for a couple months. And you may, feel like, okay, I've got room for more, or I am working too much. I've got to cut something out. But you've got to sort of dance around that capacity, what you feel like is your optimal capacity, and dance around that and test it out. Then trim things if you feel like you're working too much, or add things if you feel like you're not, you could work more and you'd like to work more.
Thank you, Evan. Next question. By the way, thank you to everyone who keeps sending these great questions. So question is, you suggested to reach out to former employees on LinkedIn. I've tried that, but never know how to approach them. For example, what exactly to say to ask them for feedback on their former company? I thought most people don't like talking poorly about their former companies.
Yeah, it is, it is a two-edged sword. I think that it's, in an ideal world, there's a warm introduction, right? Someone who knows that person, rather than just a cold outreach on LinkedIn. That's the best way in. So you tell the person in the middle, the person hey, I saw this person just left their job at Apple. I'd really like to work with Apple, or, they're a competitor in this area for this project that I'm thinking about, and I'd really like to talk to them. Could you approach them and ask if they'd be willing to talk to me? And then, don't be afraid to buy those conversations, offer to pay for lunch if they're local, or coffee, or send them a Starbucks gift card. I think that's just some people may not react well to that, but to me, it's just an expression of gratitude. But I think the warm intro is the key there. If you're going to ask someone about a company they just left, it's better if you know them, or you've got someone who can give you a warm intro on that. And then when you start the conversation, I think you want to say, look, I want to learn everything I can from you about your time at Apple. But please, if I'm digging too deep, or there's an area that you don't want to talk about, or you feel uncomfortable, just shut it down. No hard feelings. I don't want to pressure you to share information that you don't want to share.
Okay. And is there a way to ask a question about the company exactly where they're not necessarily sharing bad information, but something that might be useful? What kind of questions would you ask?
So I think that you can ask open-ended questions like, tell me what you loved about your time there. What does Apple do well? And so stick with the positive, as opposed to, what does Apple not do well, if you're looking for sort of an opportunity to eat their lunch on something, or, a product that you think you can create that they're not doing well. What does Apple do well? What did you enjoy about working there? Things like that, keeping it positive. And I think you can infer by what they're saying to you that's positive, you can sort of fill in the blanks. And then at some point, if they're comfortable and if it's been a good, warm conversation, then, you can say, look, I'm going to go in, to some negative territory. What about this? What did you think? So you don't lead off with it, you soften it up a little and start with the positive.
Thank you. Next question. Is it possible to raise funding if you're not targeting revenue right away?
So right now is probably the hardest fundraising time that I've seen. There are definitely people out there, angels, and even some VCs and some private equity companies that are willing to invest in pre-revenue companies. It's a higher risk and a higher reward if you invest earlier on, and every investor has their sweet spot in terms of where they want a company to be when they write that check. And that goes back to that risk and reward, and also the timeline, in a lot of ways. If it's going to be 8 to 10 years from the very beginning, then they know that, and they're willing to invest at that point. So there are investors that are willing to write checks pre-revenue, and there's a whole slew of valuation tools out there that have been created. But if you're asking about investment in a company where right now you're not actively seeking revenue, like you don't see that as the long-term plan, that's a lot tougher. Any investor, no matter how excited or warm they might sound to you, oh, I love your idea, this is much needed, I'm a gamer, I hear this, a lot, I wish I had this growing up, I'm a gamer, what you're doing with Game Gym is fantastic. They might not be lying, but when they write that check, they want a certain multiple return in a certain amount of time. No one's doing it for fun. No one's doing it to be along for the ride. They are writing checks to get a return at some point. So whether it's 10x in 10 years, meaning they write a check for 50, they want 500 grand back in 10 years. Either you go public or you get sold, or the dividends, you stay private, but you're giving them dividends. Their return on investment is 10x in 10 years. Again, that's just an example. Everybody's got a different one. It could be 40x in 5 years, in which case they're investing further along in a company, right? And probably like a biotech company at that point is really, if you're going to see 40x in 5 years. So my point is that every investor has that formula in mind as to what they want as a positive outcome. And if your plan is, not to ever generate revenue, but just do good for the world, that you're going to have a much harder time with investors. If you're not generating revenue yet, but you have a plan to generate revenue, there are definitely companies and investors that will invest at that point. And if you are pre-revenue, what you want to show is traction. That's the magic word in the investment community. And, traction is proof that you're moving forward. We haven't generated revenue yet, or we're not at break even yet, but we've got 100 happy customers that are paying us $1,000 a year. Again, just an example. Or we've got 4.9 stars, on Google and Apple in the App Store. That's our average rating. You want to be able to show that traction so that you're on the right path. That's what investors are going to want to see if you're pre-revenue.
Yeah, great. And to add to that, there are companies, for example, in the medical device, medical, medication, life sciences, or if you're developing something in quantum, for example, that takes much longer and a lot more money. And so venture capitalists usually do invest in those companies, but they do want to see you having some sort of grant funding, like an SBIR beforehand. Yeah, just to add that. Now, next question. Thank you. We have a lot more questions to go through. If a startup meets virtually all of the criteria described in your slide titled "What I Look For," but lacks seed capital beyond the friends and family investment already made, what do you suggest to find parties that may be interested in providing seed funding?
Yeah, so Uh, Again, if you're pre-revenue, if you've hit all those check boxes, there are going to be people that want to invest. And I think that in that case, there's a platform called Gust, GUST.com, and you can create a profile and you can actually send the profile or apply to different angel groups and venture capital groups that are in the system. I think that's a great platform. So it doesn't take long. It'll probably take you about an hour to build out your company profile on Gust, and then you can literally go hunting for, VCs or angel groups that fit the criteria, and they'll be fairly straightforward about what their criteria are. So that's one way to do it. The Dingman Center has an angel group. In most cases, they want to see revenue. They don't necessarily need to see profitability. That just happens to be their sweet spot. But they also, there's one company that they meet once a month during the school year, 9 times a year, and one company out of 4 is pre-revenue. Stan Smith is the manager of that, and I think you can probably find him on the Dingman Center website, or you can send me a note and I can introduce you. He's a great guy, and especially if you're affiliated with Maryland in some way, there's a benefit to that and a tie-in. One thing that I don't know a ton about is about grants and other non-diluted funding, but there is plenty of that out there as well. TEDCO is a Maryland group that offers grants as well as investments in Maryland companies, and there are groups like that, all over the country that serve specific regions. And so, I would look for that. I would look for companies and other organizations in your region that are looking to support startups. It is tough. That first round after friends and family is still really seed and sometimes even pre-seed. It doesn't matter what you call it. It's the second round. It's a tough round. And angels are a lot harder to find than they used to be. Rocket Pitch is another good resource. VC Fast Pitch is a resource that the Game Gym has used. It's a pitch meeting where you're one of 10 companies that pitch and investors show up. Often you have to pay something to participate in them, but they obviously want you to get funding, and so often the organizers will help. And I'm happy to help with that, to take it offline. Send me a note or connect with me on LinkedIn, and I can talk more about that.
Thank you.
I can definitely go a little bit further than 2 o'clock. Certainly, I don't want to cut off the question. So as long as we can keep going, I can keep going for a bit longer.
Thank you so much. I think we have 3 more questions in the queue. So let's get through those. Thank you so much. So the next one is, you suggested not to hire friends or family, but admittedly did not follow that rule. What practices or behaviors did you need to have in place to successfully run a business with a family member and become an exception to the rule?
That's a great question. So, Michelle and I are extremely complementary. She has deep skills with IT, with, as I've talked about, with email and building systems. And so it's always tantalizing, because generally when we come into a startup or we're going to launch a company, or I have an idea to launch a company, she almost always adds incredible value. The benefit, and what we found, is sort of like an armed truce, where we've each got our own fiefdoms and we try hard not to step on the other person's toes. But frequently, especially with exhibitor invites, I was doing the selling, and often if there was a special feature or some sort of exception, or I gave someone a special deal, that would cause her and her team to do more work. And so you have to be very, very careful about not stepping on the other person's toes and coexisting, as best you can. What you don't want to do is be in a situation where sort of both family members or close friends are involved in the same, process of the same part of the company, the same execution. I've traditionally done sales and marketing and business operations, meaning finance and sort of running the company, and she's done IT and technical operations, customer service, product development. And so those areas, they're all important, and they certainly do overlap sometimes, or they definitely, they coexist, but not as much overlap. So yeah, I failed to heed my own advice, which is why I'm giving the advice. It's a testament to our marriage and our relationship, and also the I think our maturity more than anything else, that we've been able to run companies together and work on companies together. The other thing is to set boundaries, right? So first thing in the morning, no business talk, no business talk until 9 a.m. No business talk at dinner or after dinner, right? Set those boundaries so that there's only business talk during certain hours of the day, and keep that, contained, and the rest of your life is your life together. And that, I think, applies to friends as well. So yeah, a lot of times it's tantalizing. A lot of times it makes sense to do it. And so maybe, what I should have said is not never ever do it, but just, think about it carefully and have those conversations. It's almost like sort of if you're moving in with someone, sharing a flat with someone, you execute a roommate agreement ahead of time, or at least you have a long talk about expectations. It's almost the same sort of thing as working together.
Yeah, thank you. And our next question is, you mentioned chasing down investors who are interested 1 second, then not as much later. How would you say I should go about doing this for my startup without being excessive?
Yeah, so the reason that investors start ghosting you, and I'm the same way, right? I go into a company that I think I'm going to write a check for, and I'm excited. I want to write that check, right? That first meeting, the first time I see them pitch, I'm excited and I want to write that check. Each meeting after that, it's sad to say, but you're looking for reasons to say no. Or, more optimistically, you're looking for reasons to continue to say yes, but you already want to say yes. And you're really looking for reasons to say no. And so the investor who ghosts you has found a reason to say no. And that's why they're no longer interested. And it happens all the time. They're looking at 10 companies and they're going to invest in 2. Any company that they have a great first meeting with, they're going to tell you they love you. And they're not lying. But second meeting, third meeting, fourth meeting, that's when they're going to fall out of love. And so I would say that there's no, you can be as persistent in a polite way as you want before they've said no to you. If they've ghosted you for a couple of weeks, then chances are it's over, or at least it's over for now. And you can still hit them up. And what I would do is every startup should have at least a quarterly update. And it should include the good news and the bad news in an honest way. Obviously, you want to include all the positive news, but also be honest about any really important bad news, and add those people to that list. Because often when they ghost you, it's because they just don't have the time. We've got an investor that we're chasing right now for Game Jim's second round. We've been heavily involved with them. They know us inside and out. They did not invest in the first round. We sent them a note the other day, and he sent a nice note back and said, listen, we're tapped out until January. Let's revisit in January. Most people in his shoes wouldn't bother to spend the time. And I'm grateful that he did tell us exactly when he wants to talk again. Most of them will just ghost you. And then in January, they will, if they think about it, come back to you. The quarterly investor update and investor prospect update, that is how you tickle them and get their attention, get back on their radar screen. So compile that list of people that were interested at one point and send them the quarterly update. You should be doing that for your existing cash investors anyway, and you just add the prospects to that list as well. But again, if they're ghosting you, if it's been a couple weeks, it's probably over for now. But that doesn't mean that you don't keep hitting them, and just gradually decrease that frequency and add them to the list for the quarterly update. And if you've got a ton of news, send an update every month. There's no reason not to send updates if you've got more news. But quarterly to me is the minimum cadence on that.
Thank you. And we have one more question. Are you or Michelle willing to take a brief introduction phone call for a startup which has a new approach to providing lifelong learning in a new and health beneficial way? Do you take 15-minute calls to learn about new startups?
So because you were nice enough to visit, to participate in the webinar, I will take a call. I will tell you, unfortunately, we are broke at this point. Candlelight Partners does not have money to invest, and we don't have any time available. I will absolutely take the call, and I'll give you my feedback. And we do plan to invest at some point in the future. What it will probably take is an exit from one of those 6 companies in order for us to start writing checks again. So I'm not trying to be nasty, but I want to set your expectations. I will absolutely take the call, and I'd love to hear you pitch. And I'm happy to provide feedback on that, but I do want to set your expectations that we are not writing checks at this time.
Thank you. Thank you. A lot of times just even getting the feedback is quite valuable. So yeah, thank you so much. And Evan provided contact information, so you can go ahead and reach out and schedule some time to talk to him. So again, thank you so much, Evan. This has been such a great session. I think I learned a lot, and thank you so much to everyone who submitted wonderful questions. And thank you to everyone who stayed until the end, even past the hour. Thank you to Evan. I know you're very busy, so very much appreciate your time and all of your wisdom and expertise you shared with us today. I will post this video on our Startup PMD YouTube channel for everyone who wants to review this, and for everyone who was not able to attend the live session. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Al.